who sinned, his parents or him, that he would be born this way. Well, hello, and thanks for joining me again on Just Jesus. We're going to study in the Gospel of Luke today, so you may want to make your way there to Luke chapter 16. It is an interesting, intriguing parable in verses 19 to 31. And so we'll just go ahead and begin by reading that together and kind of get some backdrop. Luke chapter 16, starting in verse 19 through verse 31. Let's read it.
Now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died, and was carried away by the angels to the Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, there's a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, in order that he may warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. But he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead.
It's a long passage, and it's interesting parable for sure. A lot of questions people have about it. I was probably last year, I guess it was during the ice storm, thinking back, there was the news. I don't watch the news very often, but I happened to watch it because of the weather situation. It showed a scene of some homeless people outside some area of the city and them struggling. And then it just flipped right over to another story without batting an eye. And they started talking about some wealthy people that had flown to France, and they were buying clothing, designer clothing. And some of the pieces were as much as $15,000 per item. And that made me think of this passage here, because you have 2 major contrasts. Here you have, that story on the news, you got homeless people, and then you got people flying to France just to buy some clothing. Who knows how much the flight cost them, and they probably flew on a private jet and so on. And here in this parable, you have a rich man who's habitually dressed in purple, which in the first century, that purple dye was the most expensive of all. And this man is living in splendor every day. And the poor man, Lazarus, is laying, he's covered with sores. He just wants to eat the food, scraps that fall off the table that end up with the dogs are coming and licking his sores, and he's just struggling. And then they both die. And the story takes an amazing change in the story. And that is that the rich man, who would think in that culture, in the Jewish culture in that day, that the rich man would end up going up into glory, because obviously he's blessed by God. He's got all this money, so God must be happy with him. And the poor man, we'd think, well, he obviously done something to get himself into that predicament with God, So he's in trouble. But there's this drastic change in it, shocking in the story with Jesus, and that is that the rich man goes down into the flames, and the rich man, the poor man, Lazarus, goes up into the bosom of Abraham, which is one of the reasons why I think it's a parable. When Christians die, or in faithful people to God die, they don't go to the bosom of Abraham; they go to be with the Lord. And so, but that's a Jewish context of that parable, and so on. But it's one of the major themes in the Gospel of Luke is called the Great Reversal. The first will be last, the last will be first. Jesus says, the those who exalt themselves are going to be humbled; those who humble themselves are going to be exalted. And different. There's a number of great reversals in the Gospel of Luke. They're in Matthew, Mark, and John as well. Some, but not like in Luke. Luke is peppered with them pretty regularly. The issue is that the rich man does not. There's no mention of anybody having a health problem. That's not the issue. The rich man has a heart problem. That's the issue. And the context for the passage really is chapter 16 of Luke, which we didn't read to start. I did that on purpose. Chapter 16, verse 14 is the context for this parable. It says in verse 14, now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things, and they were scoffing at him. And then shortly thereafter, Jesus tells the parable of the certain rich man and Lazarus. And so Luke is very intentional in his writing, and so it's obvious that these are connected. The Pharisees are lovers of money, and they think because they have money, God must be happy with them. And they see somebody that is hurting in some way, and they obviously they're not righteous like they are. Even like in John chapter 9, there's a man who was born blind from birth, and the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, his parents or him, that he would be born this way? And that's the kind of the mentality that they have, which is not unusual from people today. People today, sometimes bad things happen in their lives. They automatically, something, it has to do with God, and blame God, they make that connection. But the reality is, good things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to good people in this life. The key is if whether or not we're close to Jesus. That's the key to the whole thing.